Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Happy Wednesday. Happy New Year. If you have not heard it yet, hopefully you have this year already. But Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome to our first event in 2023, our second virtual meeting. We're so excited that so many people can join us. Please drop in the chat where you're from, where you're joining us from. We would love to know. My name is Abnia Lauriston. I am the program director here at Creative Ladder. I have the pleasure of welcoming you all and also welcoming our amazing Audrey Coburn from Capital One, Senior Director of Brand Marketing, one of the biggest supporters of Creative Ladder, to talk about our sponsor, Capital One, and how much work they're doing to really think about underrepresented creatives and how we inspire and bring the next group of leaders into this space. So Audrey, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support.
Amnia, it's always a pleasure to see you and spend time with you. And I am not going to spend a whole lot of time on Capital One. That is not why you all are here. I do just want to say that we're quite frankly just enormously proud to be a Creative Ladder partner, because as a company, we were founded on the belief that nobody should be locked out of the financial industry. So we're deeply committed to financial inclusion. And then when it comes to the creative industries, marketing, advertising, we also believe that everyone should be able to see themselves in consumer brands. We have a saying within our marketing and advertising department that we live in color, so we should create with it. So along with the Creative Ladder, we are just deeply committed to our mission of removing barriers to access in the creative industry. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm super excited just to listen in today, learn, and be an active participant. I have a personal goal in 2023 to learn something new every week. So I am ready to go. So Abnia and David, thanks for putting this event together, and thanks for getting us started.
Definitely. And that will cue us to bring on David, our co-founder and chief content officer, David Greiner, who will take the stage right now and really moderate the rest of this conversation, because this is an amazing conversation. You know all about this work from your time at Adweek. So welcome, David. Thank you for this.
Oh, of course. Thank you, Abnia. Thank you, Audrey. Audrey and Capital One, again, I just can't say how much of a wonderful supporter they've been. And it's so great to have you here. So glad you could join us. All right, we have a lot to do today. So tremendous thanks to Abnia for all the work she's doing behind the scenes to make sure that everything runs smoothly today. First, I just wanted to tell you a little bit. I won't talk long about myself. I'm David Greiner. I'm one of the co-founders of Creative Ladder. We're a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded in middle of last year. So we're only about 6 months old. Our mission is to make creative industries more accessible and more inclusive. And by creative industries, we mean advertising, marketing, production, design, kind of the really fun parts of making entertainment and creativity in the professional space, and helping new talent discover those opportunities, and then helping amplify and elevate talent from underrepresented communities in those industries. So that's as much as I'll talk about us. What are we doing here today? We want to kick off the year with 5 skills that every creative professional should learn in 2023. And we're defining that. Well, we're not defining that. Our guests today are going to be defining that. But what we encourage them to do was to not be super specific, not to say like you should master this one piece of software. It's more about something that they personally are trying to really embrace and to make a daily priority for themselves, that they bring to their work each day, to their conversations, to their relationships, to everything that helps make them a more fulfilled person in their professional and personal lives. So it's a lot to cover, but I'm excited to dive into it. We've got 5 incredible panelists today. What we're going to do is bring on each one. We're all going to get up here, and then I'm going to ask each of our presenters to walk through for a few minutes what is their pick for a skill that you should learn, why they think it's important. Then we're all going to discuss it as a group. Do not miss out on the chat. I see the chat's blowing up, and it always does. And thank you so much to everyone who's jumping in there. If you haven't already, let us know where you're watching from. Tell us about you. And if you have any experience with you're going to recognize quite a few of our panelists, and especially the companies that they're from. So give them some love as they come up on the screen. With that, going to bring on our first panelist, Shannon Miller. Shannon Miller is managing editor at Adweek. She covers creativity, the creator economy, DEI. She is the co-host of not 1, not 2, probably by now 7 podcasts at the Adweek Podcast Network. One of my dearest friends, former co-host with me of Yeah, That's Probably an Ad, the podcast on Adweek, which she is still the host of, and also runs Off Madison, a fantastic podcast about advertising beyond Madison Avenue in New York. Who, Shannon, I'm Linda, just introducing you. How are you, my friend?
I am wonderful. It's so good to see you. It's a little weird to connect on this level now. I'm still getting used to the new dynamic, but it's a pleasure to see you.
Shannon and I were colleagues for several years at Adweek. I was at Adweek for about 15 years, and it's just one of the most delightful, intelligent, and charismatic people you could ever hope to be friends with or work with. And I'm so excited that you're here today. And with that, I'm going to bring on our next one because everybody's fantastic. We've got Santi Pochat. Santi is the VP of Brand Marketing for LinkedIn. Starting his day early out in Los Angeles. Thank you for joining us, Santi. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are excited to have someone not just from LinkedIn and leadership at brand marketing LinkedIn. I should note that this is not your first rodeo in terms of big, well-known names of brands that you've worked on. You've worked at Google, you've worked at Edelman, and you have really become such a fantastic voice in this industry for elevating underrepresented talent. You've been such a supporter of Creative Ladder, quietly, not drawing a lot of attention to yourself, but we see you, we notice, Santi, so thank you for all you do every day.
Appreciate that. Yeah, very, very excited to support.
All right. And next up, we've got Bernice Chow. Bernice, she's got like 17 titles, and they are all amazing. Most of us would be lucky to accomplish any one of these. Bernice, thanks so much for joining. Bernice, the head of integrated creative for Zambezi, a fantastic agency. Also in Los Angeles, right? Look at all these West Coasters getting up early for us, getting started. So excited to let people know, if they haven't already, that Bernice is the co-author of The Visibility Mindset, a fantastic new book. So please check it out. We'll drop links in the chat where you can learn about where you can get that book. It is fantastic. Bernice is also the co-founder of Asians in Advertising, a tremendous organization that's had such a huge impact. When did you found Asians in Advertising? It's not a super old organization.
March 2021.
Man, fantastic. And tell us just a little bit, we could talk about all of those, but tell us a little bit about Asians in Advertising and how folks who might want to get involved, what they should know about it.
It's a 501c3 nonprofit. We started in March of 2021 with an idea of just creating community for the API organization and for allies to support. And we are now over 4,000 globally. So if you want to join us, we have a bunch of free events as well as our summit that's coming up in May. But check us out at asiansinadvertising.com.
And a fantastic public speaker. So check out Bernice's site and learn all about her. But to keep moving, we've got Dr. Marcus Collins. Marcus is such a fantastic personality, leader, heart of a teacher. So excited to have him here. The head of strategy for Wieden & Kennedy, New York, one of the most celebrated agencies, probably one of the most celebrated offices of any agency. The New York office has been doing some of the most incredible work in marketing over the last few years. Marcus, it is so exciting to have you here. And I made sure to write down your full academic title because I wanted to make sure I got it right. It's Clinical Assistant Professor of Marketing at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. Welcome, Dr. Marcus Collins.
Thank you so much, my friend. Such a pleasure to be here.
And tell us, Bernice, not the only author here. Tell us about your book, Marcus.
So I have a new book coming out, my first solo book coming out in May, called For the Culture, that examines the influence of culture and human behavior, where I argue that the most influential force that exists in mankind is culture. And if you are in the business of getting people to move, there's no power, no cheat code more valuable to you than culture. But the better we understand it, the more likely we are to leverage it as we put ideas in the world, get people to shop, to vote, to join, to subscribe, and to support.
There are a few people I enjoy following on social media more than Marcus. He brings so much to strategy, which can be a very heady field in marketing, and he brings it down to earth through the lens of hip hop and through culture. It's wonderful. Follow him everywhere you can. He's a just fantastic person. Speaking of fantastic people, glad to round out our panel here with Daniel Lobaton. Daniel is just starting as Chief Creative Officer of Rethink New York. Rethink is a Canadian-based ad agency. They've become one of the most beloved and admired ad agencies in the last few years. You may have seen a lot of their work for Heinz and so much else. But before that, he spent quite a while at Saatchi & Saatchi New York, where he created some of my favorite ads, some of your favorite ads. It's a Tide ad. He's made so many highly celebrated, one of the most celebrated creatives in the world. That is not hyperbole. Daniel, it is so exciting to have you here. And tell us a little bit about your new job.
Yeah, well, it just started. So, well, first, thank you for having me here amongst this great company. So, I'm very honored to be here, and I'm excited about what I'm about to learn today. So, yeah, I mean, the new job is very exciting. It's an independent shop. We're starting the New York office, and I think, yeah, it's nothing but excitement. And may the force be with us, I guess. It's gonna be great.
Well, fantastic. On that note, we're going to get started. So each presenter, as I mentioned, is going to spend a few minutes. The rest of us are going to mute so that we don't accidentally pull the screen away from them, and they're going to get to talk for a few minutes about the skill that they picked. Then we're going to break back into a group, and we'll talk about what we think of it, but we want to hear what you think too. So definitely drop some comments into the chat, some questions if you need clarification from the speakers. We'll also have an official Q&A that'll be running so you can ask formal questions. But let's jump into it. Shannon, you're our first guinea pig. Do you want to start with your skill for 2023?
Sure. So when I was asked to join this panel, admittedly, I was at a loss for what I was going to talk about in terms of my creative journey. I didn't come by anything traditionally, whether it was podcasting or writing. Everything just sort of happened. But I realized that I could trace everything back to my deep, abiding love for Early's Archie comics. I loved them. I always wanted to talk about them, and it was just a thing that really drew me into my sort of creative mindset, or where I am today. And what I realized is that I really wanted to be able to talk about this love that I had. I wanted to be able to use it to connect with others. And from there, I had to figure out how I was going to effectively communicate this love. I had to figure out why I loved it. I had to figure out how it sort of fit into culture, and how I was able to sort of use that as a sort of base in order to explore different mediums. So I got together with 3 other Black women to create Nerds of Prey. It was a nerd culture podcast that talked about all the things that we loved. And I thought that I was going to just sort of keep it to comics, but I was able to sort of springboard and talk about film and television and music. And through that, because I wanted to be able to sort of widen my audience and sort of connect with more people, through that, I had to learn how to launch a podcast. I had to learn how to edit. I had to learn how to market my podcast. I had to learn how to sell myself, how to develop a pitch. And it was because of this one love, I was able to sort of figure out how to do all this stuff. So if I was able to really sort of break it down into like a single sort of tip or skill, it's turning your niche loves into broader buildable skill sets. It can be really scary when you're trying to sort of grasp for what your thing is, or kind of what your avenue is, when you find out, wow, this thing that I love and thing that I'm good at is hyper specific, and I don't know how it can help anyone. But when you begin to really sort of break it down into parts, you'll realize that there's probably a lot of really amazing hidden talents that are sort of built into this one expertise. And from there, I mean, without deciding that I wanted to talk about Archie comics for some weird reason, I learned that I was actually a great audio editor, that I was a great writer, that I was a great cultural critic, that I was able to do a lot of things. So being able to break down the things that you love and examine why you love them, your ability to effectively communicate that love, and to branch that out enough to be able to adapt it into multiple mediums will probably lead you to a litany of useful skills that can work just about anywhere. So I guess that's the big thing, is just realizing the potential of the things that you love. If they're weird, great. The weirder, the better, because what you'll find is that you are probably a huge expert in something that you didn't realize could be usable anywhere. And now I feel like I don't feel so lost at sea anymore. I can, in terms of media, I can sort of go just about anywhere I want, because I wasn't afraid to lean into the weird and make it something useful. I now have this like deep abiding fear of the lo-fi music cutting me off and playing me off stage. So I think that's pretty much a good summation of what I came to talk about today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So And this is such a perfect summary of what has made Shannon so successful at her job. And your job now encompasses so much, covering all of creativity, covering the creator economy, covering diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. But it all started with embracing this passion and not being embarrassed by it. And I feel like some of us, especially some of us older folks, were taught like, oh, you know, try to fit in and try to like tell people what they want to hear. And now I feel like it's really a bummer if you interview someone for a job and they don't have a passion. They don't have a thing that they're really, and you feel like they're just trying to tell you. Bernice, you're nodding a lot. What's your take on this skill?
I love that. I definitely resonated with what you said about like fitting in and being a little uncomfortable kind of growing up with having to fit in. But when I really stepped into what really made me unique is where you really find the close bonds with other people, as well as just be your own self. So I love that Shannon shared that.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I have grown up to realize is there was a time when it was like very embarrassing to say that like you love fanfic or you write fanfic.
Yeah.
Like, there'd be like a time like I would rather die before anyone knows that I like write like
yeah.
fanfic. But
I used to secretly go to Comic-Con and now it's mainstream.
Exactly. And like those fanfic writers, the best creative writers you'll ever see in the business. There's something buried in like these things that we were trained to be ashamed by. And you shouldn't. You probably have more skills than half the people that are, you know, that we consider stars today. I'll say it.
Marcus, when we were setting up and I mentioned that you've done such a fantastic job of bringing strategy down to earth through culture. And I feel like that's exactly what Shannon's talking about.
1000%. Emil Durkheim referred to this as collective effervescence, that people who are like ourselves, we promote solidarity, we come together, right? So I saw someone put in there, Trekkies unite, right? Just knowing that someone is like you, we find ourselves connecting. And as human beings, we are social animals by nature. So we're trying to find ways to crash into each other. So what may be your idiosyncratic quirk is actually the thing that kind of defines people's worlds. And knowing that Shannon's way into comics, or Archie's more specifically, like you go, that's my girl, she's like me. And as a marketer, good night. Like that's the kind of connections that we're trying to make with consumers day in and day out.
And I should point out that when I was interviewing Shannon to hire her for Adweek's creative editor, or in one of those, you told me that story about like, well, I guess what you'd say I'm really passionate about. And I could list a million things I thought you would say at the end of that sentence that was not Archie comics. And I was just like, and it took the interview to such a different place, right? And such a fantastic conversation. And I like to think that if the interviewer had been like, what is this? Who are we talking? You would have like moved on to another place, right? You want to find a collection of nerds like we got to work with at Adweek. Santi, I feel like this is LinkedIn is a place where there's still some questions about how much of you can you be? Like, do I need to act like my dad on there, or can I go ahead and just nerd out about my favorite stuff? Do you feel that that's changing? Is that part of what brought you over there?
I think it is. You know, I've been at LinkedIn for a little bit over 3 months now, and so I can still play the new card and say that I talk a lot about this internally, and I relate to the weird that Shannon talked about, because I think weird is often used as like a bad thing, is to try to other people away sort of from the mainstream, but like that's what makes some of the best stuff. Your version of weird, right? Like it doesn't need to be offensive, and it doesn't need to be outrageous, and it doesn't need to be negative, but embracing what makes you weird is a part of bringing your whole self to places like work, to places like LinkedIn, right? Obviously I'm biased here. So when we think about things that like we find to be cringe, right? Like on places like LinkedIn, like these like posts that you're like, I probably wouldn't have done that, or this person seems a little disconnected from reality, right? You have to embrace that too, because everyone's on a little bit of a journey, right? Like we talk about, diversity and inclusion, and we talk about journeys in that space. The journey to like interact with other people, like some people are not born with the capacity to like relate to other people. And they need to learn that. And that actually comes from like tactile experience. Like you need to go to the office, and you need to like be out in the world, and you need to interact with other people. And I've met a lot of people, Shannon was talking about how she had a non-traditional role, I'm not, I'm not American. I'm Argentine. I moved here about 12 years ago. So like that cultural shock for me actually taught me a lot about like who I am. Making sure you're constantly sort of defending like your little territory and like who you are as a part of that culture, I think is, and embracing that, and as uncomfortable as it may be, as like weird as it may be, as niche as your fanfic may be, eventually, by the way, like fan fiction ends up being like movies. It ends up being like Twilight, right? So like, or like whatever the one after Twilight, like the fan fiction from Twilight that became a movie, and I can't remember what it is now. But like, those like little nuggets are what make culture. And I think, I relate to a lot of what Marcus talks about, like Dr. Hans talks about, because like culture starts at those like little nuggets that like make people uncomfortable. Like, oh, I'm going to do something that I love. And then you find one person, two people, three, and then there's like a whole room, and then there's like a whole stadium, or there's like 100 million people watching you on YouTube. Embracing your cringe is like choice, and like we should be doing that more often. We should be embracing that as like marketers as well.
I'd like to thank Mia in the chat for, I was going to be the one who said, I think you mean 50 Shades of Grey, Santi, yes, the fan fiction from Twilight.
That is exactly right, yes. Absolutely.
But Daniel, I feel like we cannot skip a conversation about embracing your nerdery without talking to you. I've always loved this aspect of you and how it feeds into your creativity. But at the same time, I don't want to give any spoilers of the part that you're going to be talking about in a minute. But I did want to give you a chance to jump in. Anything you'd want to say about embracing what you're really passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, I think Shannon is like secret origins of so many creatives, the whole comic book thing. Like myself, I was sharing with David earlier that like, or even with you, Shannon, last time we spoke, that the reason I ended up in this business is because I started asking why is Captain America dressed as a flag? And like, then you start digging down the hole. Oh, it's a propaganda tool used in a specific context, and that's how they ended up doing this. So what looked originally as an innocent comic book that maybe as a child or as a young person, you go like, oh, that's cool. The more you ask why that exists, in which context, how does that extrapolate and into other pockets of culture, the more you start to realize there's so much more in common about your little niche thing that you love with things that other people can relate to. And once you kind of unlock that thing that made you feel like the odd person out, because I think 20-something years ago, reading comic books, you were the odd person out, suddenly you see like, oh, I can use this because that experience they're having, I've had a similar experience in a different way, or this is coming from that place and I see how that got there. And once you start making those connections, I think your niche thing becomes so much more relatable for anyone else that you can actually capitalize on it, right? Like advertising came from me liking Captain America because it's an ideology bundled in a way that people can buy, and here we are, so I think that's a very interesting skill to have,
Yeah, I do love that when I finally got into an industry that supposedly is there to define what's cool, and I found out that everyone is a complete nerd, and I fell in love with this industry. So it's been fantastic. It is time to move on. I just want to give a quick shout out to the chat because it has been fantastic. I feel kind of rude that I keep like looking off to but it's because the chat is as good as the conversation happening on stage. So thank you all so much. And with that, we're going to move on. Santi, how about you share your skill that you'd like everyone to pick up in 2023?
Sounds good. I also, much like Shannon, had a little bit of a moment of reckoning when I got asked to do this. I was like, oh no, what am I going to talk about? And I was talking to David and Abney yesterday about, I went in two directions. One was like a very sort of like stodgy, career based. I'm gonna bore people out, and the other thing is actually something that I think is very topical right now. So I'm gonna go in that direction and talk a little bit about how I think about and how I think we should be more conscious about how we consume media, like what kind of media we consume, and some of the things that I think like just have to do with active thinking about how we do that, because we go through life, and I think this is very true, particularly of like people like me and people in advertising, that I think like we are sort of expected to intake every show and every tweet and know everything that's happening all the time, and our brains are just not built for that. Like literally our brains like are completely overloaded at any given point in time, and at the same time we're also like matched with these like, I'm gonna read a book per week this year, right? Like it's like January 1st, I need to start a list, Or like, here's like my Amazon wish list. I have 500 books that I will never read, right? I don't know about your bookshelf, but I call them, it's a cemetery of stuff that I wish I would have read, basically, right? So because like I pick a thing and I'm like, oh no, okay. And then I have 2 young kids, so it's like now it's harder, and then I always find an excuse not to do it. So over the past few years, I've spent a lot of time honing this in, and I think it's a really important skill for people in creative industries, because knowing and discerning what works for you is a part of like how you become really, really good at using the media you consume. Because like consumption for consumption's sake is entertainment, and that's totally fine. Like that's super fun, and like you should totally do it. It's relaxing. It's awesome. But in an industry where we're expected to use insights and we're expected to produce stuff, right? We have to figure out like how do we leverage all these things that we're expected with what actually works for us. Because I saw some Twitter thread a couple of days ago of like someone who's going to read a book per week, and I was like, that doesn't work for me, right? So I talk about this as like conscious media consumption, and conscious like being like the active operative word here is like you have to like really think about what you're doing. So I'll give you a few examples of how I'm approaching this, and I'm probably going to go into the music. I know Shannon avoided it, but I talk a lot. As my team knows, there's a lot of my team in this chat, so I'm sorry. But understanding, for example, that there is a pyramid of media consumption, and I don't mean like literally a pyramid of media consumption, but like a hierarchy of media that like I think you should find what that is for yourself. What do you find for entertainment? What are you trying to consume to like actualize yourself? What do you use to just be informed? Those are just 3 very like fuzzy categories that I use to sort of aggregate how I think about what I consume. So for example, a choice I make very consciously is not to have my phone in my hand when I'm watching a show, right? And this is not for everyone. It doesn't happen all the time. So it's one of those things where like you gotta try, and if it doesn't work, that's totally fine. You'll try again, and this works for me. It helps me actually consume the show. And I've stopped shows halfway and being like, it's like walking out of a movie theater. It's like, actually, like now that I'm paying attention to this show, I don't like this, or this is boring to me. But like now I know, right? When I was much younger, everyone was reading Harry Potter books, and I was like, I don't know if it's for me. I read every Harry Potter book. I hated it. I'm sorry, I did not like it. I have an opinion, but I had to read every single, like that's how my brain was. I had to read every single book to be able to like say like I just didn't like it. I'm sorry, like it's not for me. Like I'm a Dune Foundation nerd. Like that's my kind of sci-fi fiction. I apologize to any Harry Potter fans in the chat that are probably dunking on me right now, or like hexing me or whatever they do in Harry Potter. So being intentional about like what you consume. So spend like if you're going to consume a thing, consume the thing. If you're going to scroll through Twitter, just scroll through Twitter. Don't do it like while you're watching a YouTube video or listening to an audiobook or talking to your partner. First and foremost, that's rude. And it's rude to the other media as well. The second thing is, think about broadcast, things like the news as its own separate category. If you think about the news in the same category as like a documentary, like because like we consider like fiction and nonfiction to be the categories, your brain's going to be real confused because the news changed a lot. It's usually biased, right? Whereas like a documentary provides you a ton of context, and it's usually in the past. Like these are things that have been like very well created, like around a narrative. If you try to consume those things in the same category by saying like the news is what's keeping me informed, and you don't consume a variety of like news sources, like if you don't do like your media literacy little like pocket of like, I'm gonna like look at different articles from like different places, then you're still like sort of guilty of holding your phone in your hand while you're watching a Netflix show, right? You're sort of half-assing the media consumption, and understanding what you like is the first step in cutting what you don't, or what you don't find helpful. On the last bit, which is the actualization layer, right? Like this sort of how do you make sure like you are educating yourself, right? Stay out of the way of things that work for other people and just experiment what works for yourself. I, for example, have found audiobooks way too late in my life. Like I used to I read a lot, don't get me wrong, but like I had this weird obsession that audiobooks were for people who couldn't read. I don't know why. Like I was like, it's the book for the lazy man, like this is not great. But it's helped me actually consume in ways in which, or in times and places where I didn't have a book. I forgot it. I'm on a plane. Like I listen to audiobooks in the shower. Like it actually helps me fit in things that I really want to do in times where like having a book would have been inconvenient. So be less afraid of trying things that like you're like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? It's like a podcast, right? Like you try to like put them in places, like replace the podcast with an audiobook. Not Shannon's though. Listen to Shannon's podcasts. And then the other thing is like really be unafraid to try certain sort of out of the way type methods that may work for you. There are a lot of apps today, things like Headway or Imprint, that actually take really, really heady concepts or really, really heady books and help you consume them visually. Some people struggle to consume information like, in a book. If you're listening to an audiobook, it's hard to retain like long concepts, for example. Like, you listening to a story, it's hard to sort of like visualize that. You're not taking notes. You can't like, chicken scratch the book. Using these apps, oh no, it's the music. Using these apps will help you a lot. So I'll shut up. I did pretty good. That was fine. A little bit of music is okay. I'll take it.
That was fantastic, Santi. Thank you so much. A really fantastic point, and one that obviously that if you've not had time, we'll give Santi like a few minutes to catch up on the chat because it is blowing up. I think you started some really good conversations. I'll leave it at that. But no, it's really fantastic, and I think this idea of there's almost like a fear of like the cool thing to do or the acceptable thing to do is to say I'm a book reader. Like I like to sit down and read a book. I read a book a week. And to your point, it's just like I like to consider myself well-read and well-informed, but I'm just not at a place in my life where I can read a book a week. And that idea of really thinking about maybe it's about consuming audiobooks when you drive. Did you tell your podcast story of where you listen to podcasts? Is that a secret?
I listen to podcasts in the shower. So
I love that.
Shannon, I've heard you while I shower. I don't know if that's uncomfortable.
Not weird at all.
Right?
But so
we love weird. I don't know what you're talking about. We love weird.
I'm sure everyone else here has committed to reading 3 books a week over the course of 2023, starting with Bernice's and Marcus's. But any of you have any kind of either resolutions or things you want to tackle this year in that vein?
Well, last year I put a lot of pressure on myself by tweeting that I was going to every week listen to one new artist, watch 3 episodes of one new show, see one new film, and every month I would read one new book. And that lasted me a grand total of 5 weeks before I gave up on that entirely. And it was noble of me, and it was great. I learned about a lot of great artists, but it just wasn't sustainable. Like in a time where it's just like really hard to get a few moments to yourself and to just like sort of appreciate the quiet around you, especially if you have kids or you have like a demanding job. Putting that much pressure on yourself just for the sake of keeping up with culture is really, really tough. So I really resonated with what Santi was talking about, because it's just when you're in a career that places a lot of pressure to keep up with everything, you realize that it becomes hard to keep up with anything. So it's important to remember that, I guess, when it comes to culture, no matter what you're interested in and no matter like where you're naturally drawn, you are culture. Whatever naturally draws you, you are not alone in that. And that means that there is a whole subculture, or there's a culture of people that are really drawn to this thing for a reason. So just having to sort of keep in mind that like I'm the one that drives this bus at the end of the day. Like if I like something, there's a reason that I like something, and that's valid. Is really, really important. I'm trying to pick it up again this year. Who knows? I may find like 2 new artists, but I don't know.
I think that's like a really interesting point. Like I try to equate it to like a diet. Like I consume foods that are like nourishing me, consume foods that like I enjoy, hopefully most of the food I enjoy, and sometimes I go too hard. Right, like just maybe like I could cut back on the fries. I just came back from Argentina, so I ate too much red meat. Not great for my heart, probably. But in that sense, like trying to find what that balance is for you, right? To your point, like so that you don't overcommit. Like if it's what you just described is the what were those like shakes that like those it's like basically like meal replacement shake. I'm gonna force myself to like eat a meal a day. It's like, oh, that's kind of depressing and sad, and you're not gonna enjoy it at all.
Marcus, I feel like this entire conversation has been, and we haven't even gotten to you yet, is one big ad for your book. I just feel like the whole time you're just like, yes, as you will see in my book. But no, how do you are someone who, as I mentioned at the front of the conversation, you seem like you stay in touch with so much while being a professor, while being a head of a strategy for an agency, while probably hopefully having a life outside of that. What is your way of staying on top of things?
I mean, I think it's about intentionality. As I hear Santi talk about his regime, it's about being very intentional. And I read a lot, I consume a lot, I watch a lot of television because it's awesome. I listen to tons of podcasts like y'all's. But what I also do is I know when to cut bait. Like if a show sucks, I'm done. And I'm down escaping at episode 3. My wife like blows her mind when I'm saying, I'm done reading this book. She's like, you're gonna stop? You're only like 4 chapters in. I'm like, no, I'm done. Like, I don't feel like I need to complete it because who am I trying to please? Like, I'm not pleasing anybody. It's just for me, right? So this idea of being intentional kind of goes back to Shannon's earlier point about sort of just doubling down on you, right? And like, I always think about it is that, you know, you're running your race, not anybody else's. And I was a swimmer back in the day, so I'm down with like, I'm racing the clock, not the person next to me. I'm trying to be the best version of myself. And the more intentional we are about that, in my mind at least, the more we start to consume. Now, do I know everything about culture? And not at all, because Shannon said culture is everywhere. It is like explaining water to a fish isn't everything that we consume. But my little space in culture, I dig way deep into it. So you want to talk about 90s R&B or some Take 6 of Boyz II Men? We could do this all day long.
So one thing I wanted to share before we move on, just because this really ended up being a small thing that had a big impact on me, was that you may be shocked to learn from a bald middle-aged white guy, I'm obsessed with history and I love reading history books and listening to history podcasts. But I felt like I was kind of hearing the same things over and over again. I decided one day, probably a New Year's thing, it was probably about 2 years ago, I was like, I'm not going to listen to any podcasts that are hosted by men or that are about war or about military or about fighting. And I don't mind. I love war podcasts. They're great. They're interesting. But I felt like everything is about great men and about war. And I was like, there's got to be so much else out there. And thanks to algorithms, thanks to curiosity, I discovered podcasts that ended up being my absolute favorite, that I'm now obsessed with. And I still, will make time for your average World War II podcast. But that sometimes you do have to be intentional, to Santi's point about saying, I'm going to pursue this, not because of some, it's like, oh, it'll make me sound more, culturally appropriate. It's just because I was getting bored with what I was doing. So with that, we could all talk about this one forever, but we have got so much more conversation. Bernice, I'm so excited for yours. You've had such an exciting few years and are so involved in so many ways and have given so much great advice to folks. Bernice, what is your skill that you'd like everyone to pick up in 2023?
So the skill that I want to talk about today is visibility. My background is a graphic designer. I am now a creative director. But when I started my career, I was always taught, culturally at home to keep my head down, work hard, and show great work. And that when I did that, I would prove myself of worthy and better projects and opportunities and promotions. However, now I'm 18 years in my career and I realized good work wasn't enough. And so throughout my career, I was an Asian woman. I was usually the only female or person of color in any room or any department. And because of that, you would think that I would be the loudest voice or the most seen voice. However, I found I was the exact opposite. Because I was so in the anomaly, the fact that I was one of one, I realized I was kind of invisible. I found myself left out of the boys club, the cliques, and I was given kind of the crappy, time-consuming menial tasks. I realized when you do your work really well, they give you a lot more of the work that you can do really well, the stuff that, maybe the other people don't want, but you say yes to. Talking to that resolution talk we just had, one of my thing is anti-committing because of the the cap it does on your visibility, because you want to be available for the projects that really do make you stand out. And I wanted to give an example of this like boy club clique that was left out of. My old CEO founder at an agency, he used to come in the office in the morning and he used to roll down the aisles and he'd be like, "Hey dude, what's up? Fist bump, nice kicks. How are the ladies?" And then he'd go up to my desk, the only woman in the wing, and was like, "Hey Bernice, how was the weekend?" And you could just tell by that interaction that my relatability was just on a whole different level. Even though we are just as good friends, at the same time, I wasn't invited to the hangout sessions. And because of that, of those rooms that I was invited into or wasn't invited into, that's where those opportunities lived, and that's where I wasn't included on. So one thing that I really realized is that you don't have to belong in the cliques for those opportunities. You can create that visibility for yourself. And that's one thing that Jessalyn Lamb and I talk about in our book, The Visibility Mindset. How can we live purposefully each day that even if you're not invited to those rooms, that you can have a voice for yourself? And so I'm going to go through 5 different ways to activate this in different ways to come out. The first one is to find your voice. So when you're in those meeting rooms, whether it's Zoom or in person, I was always taught that if you didn't have anything important to say in those rooms, to not say anything at all. So I would go into these briefings, put my head down, and be like, okay, I'm taking all the notes. I'm going to have a really strategic and smart answer. And then I'm going to go back to my desk, figure out the right answer, and then come back and share it. But I realized that's how you become invisible in those rooms. And that's how you not get invited back to those rooms, and how you end up being the note taker. And so now in every meeting I'm in, I always try to make sure I say something, whether it's a question or it's a build. So just want to say that as a way of coming into those rooms and making sure that you're being seen. So even if it's a question like, how are we measuring success? Or Shannon just had a great idea. This is how we can add to Shannon's idea. Or even if that's uncomfortable to you, you can leave it in the Zoom chat. Like everyone here that's engaging, you're showing up and being seen. So that's another way. Know what you want. One of the things that I was like, going up my career, I was like, oh, my boss is going to know when I need the raise or when I need those opportunities. Get really specific on those opportunities that you need. Offer your manager is busy with their own workloads and their needs are on their own minds. So they don't know what the opportunities that you want and really could have in your career. So if you want to have better presentation skills, find a presentation class, bring it back to your manager and say, is there an educational reimbursement for this class? Or perhaps like, hey, in that next meeting, can I present a couple of slides? These are the slides that I want to present. So making sure it's really clear on what you need. Or is there a project you want to work on? Is there an extra account? Like, oh, I want to work on sports account. I want to work on the car account. I want to work on the next Super Bowl. Knowing what you want in your career is incredibly important. The next skill, number 3, is create opportunities. Make friends with team leads outside of your department. Tiffany Rolfe, the global CCO of RGA, I was listening to an interview she had, and she was telling the story of how when she was a junior, she would come in with snacks, donuts, and kind of roam the aisles and be like, who needs help with their work? So just so she can meet one, like, and build her portfolio out. So it's a great way to show that your enthusiasm for the work in the office. The fourth one I'm going to give here is build your network. You never know when you need to tap into your network to find a job, ask advice, get referral. Create those working connections with peers, mentors, advisors, those who you want to work with. I am an introvert, and networking was so uncomfortable. There used to be all these office parties where vendors would invite us out, and I would just kind of cling to the people I knew, to the corners of the room where I felt the safest. But I realized that isn't how you build a network. You can't just be in your comfort zones. You really need to activate those you meet. And so one of those stats that I read was like 85% of jobs are filled through networking and 70% of jobs aren't even posted online, which is incredibly scary if you're an introvert who doesn't like networking. But it just shows you how you need to leverage those opportunities and those people out there, and know that it's a win-win situation for you and the person on the other end. making sure that this is a working relationship. A friend of mine, Eric who's a principal product strategist lead at Walmart, who's able to jump 4 verticals in his career without purely on connections he built. And here's the sound that's coming on. For the last one I want to say is show up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a very trusted source. If you follow David or Shannon, you'll know how much they post and how amazing they are. 900 million people are on this platform and only 1% post consistently every month. So if you just post once a week, you can be shown up. So thank you so much. Sorry, it was a lot longer than I thought I would go, but had so much to share.
Have to apologize.
So thank you.
Bernice packs every presentation, every conversation with so much insight. Again, big shout out to Bernice as a speaker too, which, as you can tell, 45 minutes would not be enough time to learn from everything Bernice has to teach us. But with that, I'm fascinated to hear some of the experiences. I wrote like 85 notes while trying to stay focused on listening because there's so much the chat was blowing up. I'm curious, Shannon, that these are topics that you and I have talked a lot about how you encourage folks to get more visible when they feel like no one listens to me, no one's paying attention, everybody seems to know each other. And what really resonated from that conversation with you about what you would advise people?
Like, first of all, when it comes to like being able to carve out spaces for yourself and really make yourself visible, like Bernice is the master. So I hope everyone took a lot of notes and really took this to heart, because the things that she's been able to do in the span of like a year is like insane. And in terms of like one of the skills that I really had to learn myself was to be a little bit more visible on LinkedIn. Just, I have to like, I cannot overstate how like every like molecule in my body is makes LinkedIn really, really difficult. I am very much not a LinkedIn person. I was not built for LinkedIn. But the more that I posted on that, I saw that there was a lot more engagement in what I was writing. And there was a lot more confidence, outward confidence in what I was able to share with the world, because I was able to communicate that through LinkedIn and the connections that I made there. When you talk to any major, like anyone in the C-suite, any person in finance, they all point to LinkedIn as just an incredible source in a way to connect genuinely. So I would definitely back that up 100%. Even if it's deeply uncomfortable for you, as it is for me, LinkedIn is a great tool.
Daniel, I wanted to point out, because it's a topic that does not get talked about enough. You hear it especially through the context of award show juries and things like that, but is the language barrier for folks who move into an English-speaking country, and they generally speak far better English than anyone there speaks Spanish or anything else, but it can make them self-conscious. I've known people who've taken advanced English classes just to be able to argue better in jury shows. But what advice have you given to folks who move to America, to the UK, Canada, about getting more visible and getting past that discomfort of feeling like I'm not going to express myself as clearly as I would like?
I think it depends on how you get to that country, honestly. Like I came in through Texas. I didn't come in through the big door. And I think that helped a lot, because like I lived in Texas, I lived in Kansas City, and I think you get to learn about one aspect of the country that you wouldn't normally get to learn in like the heart of advertising or of communications, which is the two coasts. And I think you hear your accent a lot louder in those type of places. At least in my case, I was like, wow, my accent is thick. And then when you come here, you realize, oh, well, these cities are a lot more diverse and so on. And I think it changes your point of view. I've seen some people come here from other countries. And normally, in order to get to the US, you probably have a good track record of success, right? Like, even to get a visa, you need to have accomplished a certain number of things. So people come in, and some people come in hot, and they're like, hey, I'm really good at what I do. And then the collision it's not the accent. I don't think it's the accent or the skin comment. I think the collision is more cultural. It's like, oh, here we are. Like, I'm the brown guy with an accent surrounded by people who serve delicious compliment sandwiches. And then what do you do with that? Because I've never had one, And I think that, to me, is like the key to, you see this, you mentioned award juries. That's what you see. It's like you see different backgrounds and different people and how they speak about the work and how they speak about their own culture and how they speak about what an idea should or should not do, where it should step or where it should not step, what the starting point should or should not be. And this is a country that is built around the celebration of differences, while other countries are built around the universality that everyone is the same. And I think that becomes very clear. I know that this was a very heady answer, but I think it matters. It's like you need to understand where the people are coming from, as much as where they're going into, and what that means to them. I think that's the part that's the most ignored. People assume that this is that top culture you need to get adapted to. I was lucky enough to work in a New York agency that was run by two Latin people, and I think that gave us a lot of leeway to say things in a more Latin way, in a sense of oh yeah, that idea is very stupid. And some people were like, oh, is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's the highest compliment we could give you. That's the stupidest idea on the wall. That's the one we should make. And even in the past 3 days in my new job at the Canadian agency, said we'll make the stupidest one. And people were like, is that good or is that bad? I'm like, sorry, I haven't explained this to you yet. Stupid idea is the best idea because it's just breaking all the rules, right? In the best possible way. So, but you need to own it. It goes back to what Shannon was saying and what Bernice were saying. It's you need to own that. If you don't own it and if you don't stay true to that, then you just become this weird Snapchat filter of a human, no?
And before we move on to Marcus's skill, Santi, I feel like we can't ignore you. The chat has absolutely been nothing but LinkedIn discussion and LinkedIn links for the last 10 minutes. What is your advice for folks who, to Bernice's point, want to be more visible on LinkedIn, to Shannon's point, sometimes have to make, and your point, Santi, about your whole skill is making a dedicated kind of choice to really be present in that decision. What advice would you give folks who want to be more visible on LinkedIn?
Just a couple of things. I think the number one, and this goes to the introverts out there. I also hate networking. I don't like it. It makes me very uncomfortable. But if you don't ask, you don't get. Right. So it's very specific. I think that happened, Bernice was talking about being very deliberate about the words that you choose when you're asking for a project or you want to present. It's you gotta verbalize that stuff. LinkedIn is not similar to that. There's two things that I do want to call out, and one is sometimes we talk about something called a network gap. And it's this idea, and it is a very American phenomenon where people who leave certain schools, for example, or who are not from here, don't join places like LinkedIn with a bunch of people that they went to school with. That maybe know someone who works at a company, or they're already in an internship. So the network gap is very real. Not everyone is born with this sort of plugged in mentality. So I want to recognize that. I think the way you become visible is honestly by contributing and adding value, right? Connection is not just about sort of this one-on-one, literally hitting the connect button, but LinkedIn is, and I think a lot of you probably have felt it over the past few years. We moved into this sort of more decentralized way in which, you have even people on this panel, you're sort of starting to add value at scale, because adding value within your network is not enough. You have to help people outside of it, right? Things like enabling creator mode, which is a very sort of practical thing that you can do, and just sharing your experience. You'll find people that will want to connect with you. So that the onus is not on you to just constantly reach out to people, constantly ask them for things. The biggest advice, or the best piece of advice that I give people who are, for example, trying to break in to advertising, is always to figure out what value they can add from day one. It goes back to sort of what Shannon was saying, some of what Daniel was saying, around sort of where you come from, obviously Bernice and the background, sort of the environment you're in. You being really intentional and really conscious about okay, I'm gonna go ask this person for an interview. I'm gonna ask this person for an intro. I'm gonna ask, okay, why would they do this? I don't know this person. They don't know who I am. We have no friends in common. We're not, doing this. I read a book, for example, about the Cosa Nostra, the mafia in the U.S. A few months ago, and in the mafia, you had to get introduced by a third person, always. So if you went directly to try to introduce yourself to someone from another family, they wouldn't acknowledge you. The world doesn't work that way anymore. And the reality is people can find you and consume your content and consume your insights and consume your art and your ideas and all this stuff randomly. So being open to people coming in, Honestly, that's how I got in like the best jobs. It's like a friend of a friend of a friend saw a thing, like we stay connected like 10 years. It's like it's never that intentional anymore. So if you make it all about intentionality, you end up being like a salesperson. You're pitching all the time. And I think that's what we're trying to do as advertising people. If you work in an agency, that's all you do all day. But for ourselves, it's hard to sell ourselves as a person because we're so busy selling our clients and coming up with stuff. It's like that's not a lot of attention. So be intentional in not being intentional in a way. Just add value, right? Figure out what that is. Like, what insights are you sharing? What content you can produce? If you have no original thoughts, just share stuff that you find interesting. Yeah. That's okay too. My favorite blog of all time is a blog run by Jason Kottke. Kottke.org, by the way, highly recommend it. It's just like a link. There are links of stuff that he likes with like a little commentary, but like not super technical, just like stuff. And I just happen to like the stuff he likes. And I love that blog. It's my favorite place on the internet. Adding those sort of like finding like with the thing that works for you, much like we're talking about intentionality, and just figuring out like what your value is to other people will help you a lot more than just being like, I'm going to reach out to 40 people today. Because your open rate on that is going to be fairly low. I will tell you right now. And then getting into like, I'm going to get on a Zoom with you, even lower from there, right? So you got to figure out like what you're bringing to the table a little bit, even if that's just who you are or where you're from.
The only thing before we jump to Marcus, because I want to keep moving, I would just share a life-changing networking tip I got. Someone asked a really fantastic question that hopefully we'll have time in the Q&A to get into about networking when you have anxiety, when you're neuroatypical. I will say one piece of advice I've heard that especially from people who struggle with anxiety, and honestly it's been helpful for me too as someone who doesn't, is show up early for the networking events. If you're the last person to show up, which is tempting because you kind of want to slip in the back, it's much more anxiety inducing to introduce yourself to these crowds who are already talking to each other. If you show up very, very early, people just kind of drift over to you and ask, and it's just less painful. So just one of those small life hacks I picked up that made a big difference. With that, Dr. Marcus Collins, tell us your skill that you would like folks to pick up in 2023.
Yes. So my skill actually is a good pickup from Daniel, and it's empathy, right? It's a word we often use, but like seldom really kind of dig into. And I like the way Michael Ventura defines empathy. He says it's self-aware perspective taking. Because I'm a firm believer that things aren't the way they are, they're the way that we are, right? The way we see the world is a byproduct of our cultural subscription, right? The experiences that we've had and how we translate the world, which means for a marketer, especially in the creative world, it's not what we say, it's what people hear, right? We can say one thing and intend to say a thing, and people don't hear that at all, right? Because we translate things through our meaning-making frames, right? And empathy allows us to see the world through the eyes of other people. That's why for some, a cow is leather, for others it's dinner, and for some it's a deity, right? For some, a rug is decor, for others it's a souvenir, for some it's a place of worship, right? Things aren't fixed. And if we want to connect with people, we have to see the world through the eyes of other people. Not only does that make us better marketers, but honestly, it just makes us better human beings, right? Just to understand that things aren't the way that they are, they're the way that people are. So some ways to go about that is one is as a practitioner and as just a member of society, I really borrow from comedians because they're the best at this. I mean, comedians just watch people. They watch people and just behave, just kind of show up in the world. And they go, whoa, that was odd. See what she did? And he did it too. And they did it. Okay, this is a thing. And as they observe this behavior, they then start taking theory and apply it to why this thing is happening, to describe it. Then they find a way to say it with a slant. They go on stage and say, hey, you guys ever notice that every time you go to the grocery store, you do X, Y, and Z? We go, that's so me. Of course it is, right? The better we understand people, the more likely we are to connect, whether it's through commerce or it's just through our normal socialization, right? So observing people, it's super, super powerful. And then it's secondly, removing your bias. And that's a hard thing to do. I mean, we love to judge people. Whew, are you kidding me? Right? What's that saying that we judge ourselves based on intention and we judge people based on their behavior. right? And without perspective, without empathy, we don't understand people's intention, and therefore we judge them harshly, right? We say, oh, that's crazy. You love Archie comics, you're crazy. It's like, no, like that's just their thing. Like, don't yuck their yum. Like, as much as, you know, she loves Archie comics and you love WWF wrestling, right? Like, it's the same thing. And as we start to see the world through other people's eyes, we realize where there's congruence, right? And we find ways to find our tribes, to find our communities, to find our audiences, to find consumers, to find our friends, right? This idea of connecting based on shared beliefs, the cultural underpinnings that help us translate the world, allows us to fortify relationships. And as social animals, human beings, we rely on community, rely on building, right? So the third thing is, so the first is about, you know, borrow from the comedians. The second is set aside your bias. And the third is understanding that empathy is, there's more than just one form of empathy. There is somatic empathy, which is where we mirror what we see. Someone slams their hand in the door, you go, ooh, that hurt, right? You feel it with them, right? You have affective empathy. That's the golden rule: do unto others as you want done unto you. But then there's cognitive empathy, which I think is the most powerful and the hardest to achieve, right? So if the golden rule of effective empathy is do unto others as you want done unto you. So if Santi's having a bad day, I'm gonna give him a call, check in on him, send him a text, you know, are you good? Because that's what I want Santi to do for me. Effective empathy, do unto others as you want done unto you. But cognitive empathy, that requires do unto others as they want done unto them. So Santi may be the kind of person that when I'm having a bad day, man, leave me alone. Do not call me. So as I'm hitting Santi up, like, how you doing, man? He's like, will this guy get off my back? Good Lord. Right? And we find ourselves out of sync. And what cognitive empathy requires us to do is say, though I may want it this way, this is how he wants it. So I treat him as such. And that requires setting aside your lenses and seeing the world through Santi's eyes. You know, we say like walk a mile in someone's shoes. Like, no, that's not it. Like, that's feeling with someone. This is about seeing the world through their lenses. You know, I have two little girls, Georgia, 8 years old, and Ivy, 3-year-old. I never tell them when they hurt my feelings, and they do it often. I never say to them, how did you feel if I did that to you? I never do that. I always say, how do you think you make daddy feel? And I think the more that we do that as practitioners, as human beings, we'll find that like our differences are in a lot of ways proximal, right? And we find better ways to connect. And I think, not to be, you know, utopic by any stretch, I think that it just creates a better situation for humanity, more broadly speaking.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I feel like empathy is one of those terms that it's easy to throw around. It's easy for corporate presentations to throw that in, but the work, you really dug into some of the specifics. And again, I've made just a fiendish number of notes here, but about how to bring that into practice. Did anybody want to kind of jump in on anything that jumped out at them while Marcus was?
I think I want to talk about something mostly with Marcus, just because I so relate to what you say. And I think like, you know, I go back to this idea. I've not always been great at sort of being empathetic. I pride myself as an empathetic person, but sometimes it's hard because you're in your head. Right? You're expecting someone else to be empathetic with you, and it's hard to code switch to actually this person doesn't mean what they're saying. Right? Like the way it's coming through is not sort of how I'm interpreting it. One thing that became clear to me actually in the past year has to do with intent, and I think Marcus, you said it right. It's like the intent may not have been right, and being empathetic means that you can like outline that. One of the things that I try to do a lot of now, and a little bit of to sort of what Daniel was saying about, you know, like saying like things like this is stupid, is actually like very clearly verbalize my intent. Here's what I'm saying, and here's what I mean when I'm saying that. Like here's why I'm saying it. Like just outlining what that intent was has helped me have more productive conversations, more earnest ones, like more open ones about like how I was feeling or how things make me feel. I follow the Marcus school of like not giving my children, imprinting my emotions and like letting them figure it out. But I think us as adults, we don't do a good job, and particularly like I think creatives in you know, or people in advertising, people who are like more creative, like we want the art to be mysterious. You want the process to be, you know, you want to be sort of this like brooding character that works in advertising, probably, right? but singling your intent helps other people see you for who you are. And what you mean, what language you use, and like what your tone is like different. So just do that. Start there. Like if you want other people to be empathetic with you, start by like making it easier for them to be empathetic with you.
Daniel, I know we're about to go to you for your skill, but I also feel like this is something that not a lot of people get credit for at the highest levels of creativity and advertising, is that you really do have to take yourself out of your entire life experience and make ads that are for people who are nothing like you. And sometimes some of the best ads come out of that. Was that something that you've ever had a challenge with, or how have you been able to create ads, that feel either universal or feel like they're really targeted at a group that is nothing like you personally?
I don't know how to answer that without spoilers.
Just real quick, you got 30 seconds. Like, solve it for us.
Okay, great. I think Marcus is absolutely right. It's like you need to learn how to forget about yourself and completely translate it to another human, and then come back and be like, okay, so now that I kind of understood that, what do I do with it, with the skills that I know, to make it into relatable communications? I think that's the key, but it's not easy. Definitely not easy.
Well, with that, I know we all have a lot of thoughts on empathy, and the chat's been fantastic. Encourage everyone to check it out. But want to keep moving to be respectful of everyone's time. Daniel, tell us the skill that you have picked for everyone to learn in 2023.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for bringing me right after Marcus, because I don't know if I'm going to sound as articulate or as smart. So that's great. But I've been taking notes, and I think as I was listening to all of you, I was in a way writing or rewriting the skill that I was going to say, because I think you all fed to something that I had in mind as I was trying to answer this question of like, what's that skill, right? And so we've talked about the niche interest that actually fits into who you are as a person, to have a voice of your own and represent it with pride. We've talked about how to sell yourself, right? And how to achieve those things, about empathy and all of this skill of not only understanding where someone else is coming from, but also being able to understand what the other person actually wants, not what you want them to want, right? And so, am I missing something? Oh, and Santi's point about you are actually in control of what you consume, which I think becomes you're actually in control. That actually affects the way in which you express yourself. So once you kind of like connect all these thoughts, I think I came here with the idea of the skill that you need to learn is to write like a human. And this came from a very topical last month where we've been talking about ChatGPT everywhere, and the idea of an AI being able to write. Specifically, what I was exposed to was like, yeah, the copywriter's job is at stake, because look at what an AI can actually do if you fit the right prompts. And so after reading everything that was written in English, I went to a French podcast to actually hear what the French would say, because they would probably have the opposite point of view. And it was fascinating because they said, you can have artificial intelligence, but there's the lived-in intelligence, the living experience, right? The intelligence de vivre, which they said in French. And I was like, wow, that's really smart, because you can't replace that. There's no way. You can give all the prompts in the world, but whoever is giving the prompts already connected some dots in their own brain in order to say that. So let me go back to what I originally had planned to say about write like a human. In the middle of the pandemic, I was panicking because I was in the role of Chief Creative Officer on March 16, 2020. That was my first day as CCO. And it was a day that the world locked down. And I was like, oh, what is going to happen? And 2 months in, Disney Plus released Hamilton, which I had never seen. To me, it felt like something that maybe was too American for me to understand. But Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote it, and the more I understood about this, the more I was like, okay, this can be really interesting. And smack in the middle, there's a moment in which the character of Hamilton says, I'm going to write my way out of this problem. And that echoed to what the head writer of Breaking Bad used to say. They asked him, how do you make these great episodes that end on such great cliffhangers? And he said, well, we put ourselves in a position that we feel we need to write our way out of this problem. And so it was like, that's extremely interesting. And so I wrote learn how to write your way out of a problem. And I think when ChatGPT was happening, I was like, it's fascinating that this sentence has everything we need. You have to learn how to write your way, period. Right? Let's take that. And your way means that you're able to be in touch with your emotions and who you are as a person, and you're able to bring your voice forward, the way you write, the way you articulate your thoughts, the way you put the order you pick for your words in order for people to understand what you want them to understand. This idea is very stupid. That's why I think it's really smart, right? Like that's the way I give praise to when I see like a very good idea. And Santi, I saw he said similar things, and I like, yeah, this is the way we express it from where I come from. So I'm gonna stick to that. I just need to find a way for you to understand what I mean, but this is how I write. And then there's the write your way out of a problem. And I think that's where us in this industry, that's our value, that we're gonna apply this way in which we articulate a sentiment or an idea, but we're gonna use it to creatively see a problem from different points of views and then apply the writing skills to that. Now, this all sounds very conceptual. I think it comes down to situations that are very clear. Bernice was saying, or Santi was saying about what Bernice said, you need to pitch yourself constantly. And a pitch is it should be 6 words, right? It should be 6 words that people can repeat everywhere. Every ad is a Tide ad, right? Every Super Bowl ad is a Tide ad. That was it. That was the idea, right? It took forever to get to those 6 words in that order, but there you go. Spielberg has the example of kid helps alien get back home, and that's E.T. in 6 words, right? And then I feel like the more you learn this skill of like, can I bring my humanity to solve that problem? Use from my experience, try to bring it to yours. And the better and faster you become at that, the better you will be at this. We've been in situations where one day before shipping a Super Bowl commercial, a client from really up top has said, this doesn't feel human. This feels too advertising. And so it's like, okay. And then at that moment, what I think is, how will my grandma say it? She raised me, she was there. How would she explain this problem to someone else? And suddenly I'm this 95-year-old Peruvian woman trying to explain the idea to an audience of 300,000 Americans, and the words just happen. They happen in Spanish, and sometimes I've been with a team and I've been like, how would you say this, guys, in a way that your grandma would say it? And then that's the line. You're like, yeah, there's no more truth than that, because you're trying to make this team help you write something that comes from a completely different place to explain this problem that's happening here. So yeah, I spent a month in between jobs thinking about how AI may replace us. And then I realized the best way to get out of that is to write our way out of that problem. And the only way we can do it, that the robot hopefully will get very close but won't be able to experience, is like a human, So that was it. That's my skill. Learn that.
Love it, Daniel. Thanks so much. So topical, and I can assure folks it's not quite there on the the power of AI copywriting, but it's scarily close sometimes. I think Chi mentioned in the chat that it hasn't gotten there with jokes yet. To Marcus's point, I think some of the most human things you can do is find humor, and I still am unimpressed by ChatGPT's humor take. Any thoughts from Daniel's conversation? Bernice, especially, I want to talk about, since you just finished a book. And I have to say that's something I've been writing my entire professional life, and I'm still terrified of the idea of writing a book. Going into it, did you ever feel that temptation to kind of write like authors write, or what challenges did you have to overcome to really tackle a writing project like that?
For me, it was time. One thing that I had with a publisher, instead of writing the book first and then going to the publisher and selling the book, I had a publisher who had me on a deadline. So we had a tight 6-month deadline, Jesslyn, my co-writer, and I had to meet all these benchmarks. And as I was writing, there's a developmental writer that was telling me to make updates to previous chapters. So it was, for me, it was really about setting the time and the boundaries. Santi was talking about being really intentional about the time you take to do things. So it was like, all right, these are my 4 hours, no phone near me, being really clear on what I had to do and making sure that was a concentrated, focused effort to get through that progress, and making sure I had deadlines and adhere to them. And if I miss them, it's okay. There's tomorrow. Knowing that I didn't have to hold it like fast to those rules, that I just like spend the next day just wallowing in my like disappointment in myself. I just let it go, being like, tomorrow's the next day. I'm going to get through it, and making sure that as long as I had an overall plan, that I would be in a good place at the end of it.
Fantastic. Well, I want to save some time for Q&A. Got about 15 minutes left. We've tried to kind of grab things from the chat as we could, but let's see, Abnia, if you want to pick out any and blast them out on the screen for us, so we will tackle some. What are some potential blind spots to look out for as we advance a creative career? Boy, knowing what you don't know, one of the hardest questions. Who wants to tackle that one?
I can start. If I can be a courageous one.
I'll
say what my blind spot was, I guess, and we'll go from there. I was really disciplined in being a specialist. I thought that was the path forward, and I ended up realizing that being a generalist is the ticket. And then being really passionate about a few things is great. But for example, the joke that I make is like, I'm not a media person, but I'm dangerous enough to make media people uncomfortable. Like, I mean, I may have never bought a single ad myself, like never been on a spreadsheet or negotiated an upfront, but like I know exactly how it works. So being a generalist in that sense, right, I think is a blind spot. Your blind spot may be that like your career path looks like, I'm a copywriter, and I'm going to be a senior copywriter, and I'm going to be, like a creative director, and then an ECD. It's like, well, it's a very sort of like narrow path. But the things that you pick up on the side are actually like incredibly valuable. We talked a little bit about sort of bringing yourself to work, right? Like the things that you consume that you like and enjoy. The same thing is true for your like actual professional skill set. Surround yourselves with people that are not like you, in that sense, that know things that you do not know, and learn from them.
Great, that's a good one. Well, let's keep going on some questions. Any others from the chat or from the Q&A that we should pull up here? What are some tips keeping yourself motivated and avoiding creative burnout? I don't think any of us here have ever dealt with that problem. Probably just so. Shannon, I feel like you and I, the grind of journalism is unrelenting, as it is for everybody here. But personally, I'm always fascinated. You were doing a million things when we worked together. You have only expanded since then. What's your secret, Shannon?
So the secret was that I was doing a bunch of unhealthy things to get all of that done, meaning that I was working really late and that I was like candidly taking a lot of time away from my family. And I just decided I was going to stop this year. This week, the only thing that I'm doing this week is this. I took the week off because by the time I got to the end of the year, it made it so hard to create. It made it so hard to, just come up with good content. And the reason was I was just tired. I was so damn tired because I was doing way too much. And then when I took an evaluation of like how much time I had taken off, very little, unless I was sick or I had to, take my kid to something. And yeah, it just, at the end of the day, I think the best thing that you can do for yourself as a creative is know when it's time to rest and know that it's okay to not be super, super productive in this moment. If you are having a block, maybe it's just time to step away from the thing for a moment and watch some old MTV reality shows for a week. And just know that you and your creativity and ultimately your audience are worth taking the time to taking the time to replenish yourself. Like we are creatives, but at the end of the day, you are not your creativity. Like you are a person beyond that. And the second that you realize that, I think it just turns you into a much, much better creative.
No, it's perfectly said.
I just kind of
there's something.
I love that.
Go ahead,
You go, Dan. You go.
I think there's something. I was reading a book about like emotional intelligence and happiness and all of this stuff, and there was like there's something about progress that is to be said that helps you prevent burnout. Like if you say, I'm gonna get here, and this is realistic based on the skills that I know that I have at this moment in time. I wanna get to this place, and I'm gonna set a realistic amount of time. Like nobody needs to be a superhero. Nobody needs to burn through phases. You just need to be like, oh, in a year and a half, I want to have accomplished these two things. And then you check in yourself every 3 months and you go like, how close am I? How far am I? And then you realize that there's satisfaction in the progress that you're doing consistently. And that reduces anxiety a lot because it can become a race if you let other people dictate the timing. But if you go and say, no, this is what I want to accomplish, and this is the time that I have, and that I've given myself to accomplish these things, you'll see that you get there faster than you think because you're checking on yourself and progress constantly. And if progress isn't happening, then you need to pivot, or you need to learn something. Or like, it's not about blaming others that this isn't happening. It's about like, I know this is where I want to get. Now, what do I need to do to get there? You know? And I think what Shannon is saying is that might actually help with like not feeling that you need to get there as fast as I can at 150% all the time, but rather like, okay, we just need to do one thing at a time to get to where we need to get, you know? Easier said than done.
I think about it like the music industry, you make demos. Like it's okay to have a demo. And I'm going to revisit it later. Just get the idea somewhere in some tangible form, and I'll continue to build on it. I make progress on it. You know, I'll see on TikTok like some of the demos from Michael Jackson's Thriller, and I go, man, like he changed that and he didn't do that. Like seeing it in this raw form, you go, and this is one of the best albums ever made. And like it, to know that it started someplace that was kind of rough at first and got better over time. It's like, oh, it's cool. Like I can start with something that's sort of in this bare form and then build on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. Ebony, I think we have time for two more. So if you don't mind pulling up two more good questions from the Q&A. Ooh, what's your 6-word pitch? I saw this question and I'm going to throw this at Bernice and Marcus, our authors, because I don't know if in the process you had to create a 6-word pitch for your books. Both are extremely big picture books that tackle very complex topics, but bring them down to earth. Bernice, what's your 6-word pitch for your book?
Oh, I totally should have rehearsed this one. My book is very centered around kind of the AAPI movement. So my 6-word pitch is helping AAPI close the career gap.
All right, perfect. Marcus?
Mine isn't 6. It's probably like 8 words. There's nothing more influential to people than culture.
You could probably just say there's nothing more influential than culture. Would that get you there?
That's fair. There you go. There you go. Look at that. Look at that collaboration, right? Maybe that's the other thing that, look, you don't have to do it by yourself. Like creativity requires, or oftentimes is best when it's collaborative.
Before we jump to the next one, Daniel, you just sold yourself to one of the hottest agencies in the world, Rethink, to be their, I believe, the first CCO for their New York office. What's your 6-word pitch for Daniel? See, you're muted.
He's like, can I unmute? My 6-word pitch for Daniel? Wow. This Bernice, I think I should have rehearsed this one as well. I don't know. Do you want to make stupid ideas? 7, almost. Really, really close.
I love it. Well, let's take one more question, then we'll let everybody get back to their day. This audience has been so fantastic. This group has been so great, and really appreciate it. What are some of the best resources for emerging creative leaders? Books, conferences, podcasts, other resources. I will plug Shannon's writing and editing on Adweek, the podcasts that she hosts as well, which I'm certainly partial to. Yeah, that's probably an ad, which is the podcast we co-hosted together and that she still co-hosts with Luz Corona at Adweek, is just intentionally made to be a place to kind of learn everything you missed over a week about creativity. But let's hear some good recommendations. We'll start with, Shannon, I just embarrassed you. What's a place you go to?
First of all, thank you. Very sweet. And listen to Off Madison as well. TikTok. I know, like I was very much averse to it in the beginning, and now I've learned so much from it, including how to maybe like debunk things that I find on TikTok. But it's such a useful tool in order to like sort of have things broken down into something that is very easy. It's very like learnable in a short amount of time. So I would recommend, even if you're like resistant to it, just wade into it, and you'll be surprised by how much you can learn there.
I love it. See, Bernice, what's your go-to place? I think you're muted. Still muted. Okay, well, while you get the unmute figured out, Marcus, hit us with a place that you like to look for creative inspiration.
I'm a fan of TikTok for sure from that perspective. But you know what? I just like watching my kids. Their imagination is unbelievable, and they can take things that have nothing to do with how they rework it, how they refashion it. Just gives me sort of inspiration on what to do, right? And there's a book called For the Culture worth checking out, and I have a column on Adweek that's worth checking out as well.
Also fantastic. Santi, what is your go? You've mentioned a few, but any that you haven't talked about that are great sources of inspiration for you?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. There's a couple of people who've been advertising for a long time, Ferris and Rosie Yakov, who run Genius Steals. They run a thing called the School of Stolen Genius, which I think is like a very good thing, because I think getting inspiration from work is actually a very good thing. So I recommend following them and seeing what they're up to. They have classes. They do a lot of activity as well. I really enjoy Sweathead, which is something that strategist Mark Pollard puts together once in a while. And I've been a part of some of their get-togethers, and they're always a lot of fun and super, super engaging. But the most important thing I think I try to do is I just look at a lot of work. Like get your, use your student ID, your old student ID, and get into the work and look at like Lions case studies, ask the drum for their stuff. Just look at it. Spend time with it, figure out like what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Like to Daniel's point, is like, is it stupid enough to pass your bar? Or like do you genuinely think it's stupid? Looking at a lot of work and interpreting it yourself, I think is most of what I do all day.
Love that. Bernice?
Let's see. Am I working now? Okay, great. I had to do a quick restart. So I dropped the link into the chat. This is by my friend Mars, who's here as well. They put together an amazing resource list with pretty much all the great resources. And also you can visit my website. I'm going to drop this in. I actually put a monthly column with just events and things that I find on the internet that is worth checking out.
All right. Let's see who did. I think Daniel, you may have dropped off. Do you have a source for inspiration?
You know what? I've been tracking phrases that people repeat, and I think at one point Santi was talking about like, how do you create culture for yourself? You go like, where's the quote from? Oh, I'll just go down the rabbit hole and figure which TV show is that from? In what context? What that said? And I think like whether it's a lyric of a song, just like listening to TikTok and Twitter and being like, why are people repeating this? Where did this come from? To me, has become like the best way of either finding music, like a new TV show and so on and so forth. So I think just like keep your ears open and listen to what people are saying. It's one
Fantastic.
way.
Well, we are going to wrap up. It's been such an amazing, hopefully great for you. I've certainly enjoyed it. So honored by each of you for coming out. Santi, Shannon, Daniel, Bernice, Marcus. This has been so much. And thank you to the chat. Thank you to everyone in there. Thank you to Ebony Lorston, our program director, who's been running things in the back end, along with Jessica Ferris, who's been helping and keep the chat engaged, and Nicole Tabak, who's been helping share insights in social media, and Deanna Dorsey-Callaway, our CEO, and Ryan Reynolds, that guy, he's our other co-founder. He's, I'm sure, here in spirit with us, probably in the chat, hiding under a fake name. So thank you all so much. Check out creativeladder.org. Keep an eye on the events page. We've got a lot more stuff coming up. We've got a super exciting announcement that I wish I could tell you. It's real exciting that for our next event, and it's coming up in just a few weeks. It's going to be huge, but we'll wait and I won't spoil it here. So thank you all so much, and we will see you soon. Bye.